Hello there, gentle soul. Tonight, let's take a quiet walk into the heart of the forest, where the stars are watching and even the trees are listening. This is not just any bedtime tale. It's a story about true success, not the kind that boasts about big piles or grand achievements. This is the kind of success that whispers, the kind that lives deep inside you, in the quietest part of your heart, a gentle richness, an inner fulfillment. It's the story of Squeaky, a tiny squirrel with big, sparkling emerald eyes, who thought success meant gathering the most nuts. Until one day, the forest called to him, not with words, but with wonder. So if stories like this help you breathe a little easier, or feel a little lighter, you can gently help this little forest grow with a like, a comment, or a quiet share with your friends. And please, remember to subscribe if you'd like to return to this quiet space again. It means more than you know. And if you'd like to share where you're listening from, we'd love to know what time it is for you now, and what your sky looks like tonight. Now, dim the lights, rest your hands, and let the world slow down just for a little while. Take a soft breath in and a slower breath out. There you go. Let's begin our journey with a little squirrel and his special gift and a heart that learns. Its greatest treasures were always found in being open to the magic of giving and receiving. As the last sliver of golden sun dipped behind the ancient, towering trees, a hush fell over the whispering woods. The forest, so bustling and bright by day, now wrapped itself in a soft, twilight blanket of deep blues and purples. Tiny fireflies, like scattered jewels, began to blink on, their gentle lights dancing through the quiet air. In the cozy nook of an old oak tree, tucked snugly amidst the velvety moss, lived a very special little squirrel named Squeaky. Oh, Squeaky was tiny, even for a baby squirrel, but his eyes, even in the dim light, they glowed as big and sparkling as two freshly fallen emeralds, full of dreams and a world of wonder. Tonight, as he snuggled deeper into his warm bed, his thoughts weren't just on acorns or berries. No, Squeaky had a truly grand dream, one that shimmered in his mind like the distant stars. He dreamt of becoming the custodian of the great nut of prosperity. Forest legends, whispered from one sleepy creature to another across generations, told of this great nut. It wasn't just any nut. It was a magical acorn hidden somewhere deep, in the most secret parts of the woods. It was said to be so magnificent and powerful that it could bring endless bounty and happiness to the creature who found it, ensuring the forest would forever be a place of joy and plenty. Squeaky believed with all his tiny, hopeful heart that if he could just find that one magnificent nut, he would be the best nut finder in the whole wide world, and everyone in the forest would be happy, especially him. He imagined himself standing proudly beside the great nut, its magical glow filling his cozy hollow. He saw himself as a hero, bringing endless joy to all his friends. The thought made his little tail twitch with excitement, even in his sleep. Sometimes, when the moon peeked through the leaves, casting silver patterns on his walls, he would even practice. He'd reach out a tiny paw, pretend to grasp the legendary nut, and then carefully place it in his imaginary pile, a pile that would grow so high it touched the star-dusted ceiling of his tree home. But even with all his boundless energy and big dreams, sometimes, especially in the quiet stillness of the night, the sheer bigness of his goal felt a little overwhelming. There were so many nuts to find and so many hidden places to look. As a particularly large, bright star twinkled outside his window, Squeaky would sometimes pull his little moss blanket tighter. He'd think about the vast, sprawling forest, stretching out further than his little squirrel eyes could ever see, and a tiny pang of fear would ripple through his chest. Would he ever find the great nut of prosperity? Was he really big enough, strong enough, clever enough to be the best? One night, as he dreamt, Squeaky imagined himself trying to carry the great nut itself. It was huge, bigger than his whole body. He huffed and he puffed, pushing it with all his might. Almost there, he squeaked in his dream. But the legendary nut was just too enormous, too round. With a final, comical push, Squeaky lost his balance in his dream. He tumbled head over tail, his tiny dream limbs flailing in the air, before landing in a soft, squishy pile of dream leaves and dream nuts. Oof, he puffed in his sleep, his whiskers wiggling. For a moment, even in his dream, he just lay there, a little surprised. Then, a tiny giggle bubbled up from deep inside him, even while he was sound asleep. The imaginary great nut rolled far away, and Squeaky's dream self looked at his tiny paws, covered in imaginary leaf bits. It was a funny sight. He couldn't help but let out a soft, comical sigh in his dream. "Oh, Squeaky," he murmured to his dreaming self, "this is a lot of work." But even with the dream tumble, and the scattered dream knots, and the sleepy sigh, the sparkle in his emerald eyes, even in his deepest sleep, never faded. His dream, the wonderful, exciting dream of the great nut of prosperity, still shone brightly in his heart, guiding him through the quiet night. The next morning, as the forest slowly awoke with soft stretches and sleepy yawns, Squeaky was already hard at work. He was bustling about, trying to fit just one more enormous walnut into his tiny, already overflowing pouch. He pushed and he squeezed, his little cheeks puffing out with effort, but the walnut simply wouldn't go. It was like trying to fit a cloud into a teacup. He twisted, he turned, he even bounced a little, but the pouch just stubbornly refused to hold anymore. A tiny bead of sweat appeared on his little forehead, not from the sun, but from pure, earnest effort. Suddenly, a shadow, not dark or scary, but soft and shimmering, fell over Squeaky. He looked up, his big, sparkling emerald eyes blinking in surprise. There, perched on a branch just above him, was Professor Hoot. Professor Hoot wasn't just any owl. His feathers, usually a deep, wise brown, seemed to shimmer with faint starlight, as if he carried tiny pieces of the night sky with him. His eyes, usually half closed in thoughtful contemplation, now twinkled with a gentle, knowing warmth. He had been watching Squeaky for a while, a soft smile playing on his beak. "Oh, Professor Hoot." Squeaky squeaked, his voice filled with urgency and a touch of desperation. He scrambled onto a nearby root, looking up at the wise owl with his big, earnest eyes. "Professor, I need your help. I want to be the best nut finder in the whole forest. I want to find the great nut of prosperity. But it's so hard, and my pouch won't hold enough, and there are so many nuts to gather. Please, Professor, tell me, how can I be successful? How can I become the very best?" He wrung his little paws together, his tail twitching with all his hopes and fears. Professor Hoot tilted his wise head, his starlit feathers seeming to shimmer a little brighter. He didn't say anything more right away. Instead, he gently extended one ancient, feathered wing, resting carefully on his claw, as if it were the most precious jewel, was something small and smooth. It was an acorn shell, but not just any shell. This one was perfectly smooth, polished by time and nature, and completely utterly hollow. You could see right through it. It wasn't chipped or cracked. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Squeaky, Professor Hoot, hooted softly, his voice like the gentle rustle of old leaves. "This is for you. This is a vessel of whispers. It is a very special nut finder's tool, unlike any you've seen." He paused, his wise eyes fixed on Squeaky. "Carry this vessel with you for the next 7 days, little squirrel. Then return to me." Squeaky stared at the empty shell. His little squirrel brain whirled. A nut finder's tool. But it was empty. Where were the shiny magnets? The magical nets? The invisible force fields he'd imagined? He dreamt of a contraption that glowed, hummed, and zapped nuts into his grasp. This was just an empty shell. A tiny wave of confusion washed over him, followed quickly by a small flutter of disappointment. He looked from the simple shell to his overflowing, uncooperative pouch, then back at the shell. But it's empty. Professor Hoot, Squeaky squeaked, his voice barely a whisper, a tiny hint of sadness in it. "How can an empty shell help me find nuts? It can't hold anything, and I have to carry it for 7 days." He felt a tiny bit foolish, like he'd been given a trick instead of a treasure. A challenge he didn't understand. Professor Hoot simply blinked his wise, twinkling eyes. He offered no further explanation, just a gentle, knowing nod. It was a silent invitation for Squeaky to take the shell. Slowly, Squeaky reached out a tiny, hesitant paw. He gently took the smooth, hollow acorn shell from Professor Hoot's claw. It felt surprisingly light, almost as if it wasn't really there. He turned it over in his paws, peering into its empty space. It truly was just a shell. No glowing, no humming, no zapping, just empty. He even held it up to his ear for a moment, just in case it whispered a secret instruction. He heard nothing but the gentle rustle of the leaves. A tiny, almost imperceptible sigh escaped him. He felt a little silly, clutching this empty thing when he had so much important nut finding to do. Surely, this wise owl hadn't given him a useless gift, had he? But what was its purpose? His mind, so used to thinking about filling things, couldn't quite grasp the idea of emptiness as a tool. Professor Hoot gave one last soft hoot, a sound that seemed to carry both ancient wisdom and gentle encouragement. Then, with a quiet flap of his starlit wings, he gracefully lifted off the branch and glided silently away, disappearing into the dappled sunlight and shadows of the elderwood, leaving Squeaky alone with his overflowing pouch and his curious, empty vessel of whispers that he now had to carry for 7 whole days. And so, with Professor Hoot's gentle hoot still echoing in his ears, Squeaky began his task. He carried the smooth, hollow acorn shell. It rested lightly in his tiny paws as he scampered through the waking forest. He still had his overflowing nut pouch, a comforting weight against his side, but this new, empty shell felt strange. It felt like a little burden, a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He knew Professor Hoot was very wise, but how could an empty thing, a shell that held absolutely nothing, be a special nut finder's tool? It didn't make any sense at all to Squeaky. He grumbled softly to himself, a tiny, almost inaudible murmur. A nut finder's tool that finds no nuts, he thought. He felt a little silly carrying it. He saw other squirrels, busy and proud. There was Flick, a speedy young squirrel, meticulously polishing a giant, glossy chestnut. Flick patted his own bulging pouch with a smug look. Another fine addition. Flick chirped, his voice full of pride. Then there was Pip, who had fashioned a clever little wagon, already brimming with shining walnuts and plump pecans. Pip was humming a cheerful, boastful tune as he pulled his heavy load. Squeaky watched them, his big, sparkling eyes filled with a tiny pang of fear. He worried he was falling behind. While Flick and Pip were collecting and boasting, Squeaky was just carrying an empty shell. He tried to mimic them. He spotted a smooth, round pebble, just begging to be added to a collection. He carefully picked it up and tried to place it inside his hollow acorn shell. But of course, the pebble just rolled right out the other side and dropped to the ground with a little plink. Squeaky frowned. Then he tried a beautiful, scarlet leaf, freshly fallen and perfect. He gently tucked it into the shell's opening, hoping it would stay. But the wind, a playful whisper through the branches, caught the leaf and it fluttered away, dancing out of the shell and disappearing into the sky. Squeaky sighed, a tiny puff of air. See, he thought, feeling a wave of disappointment. It holds nothing. His little tail drooped just a tiny bit as the morning wore on. Squeaky found himself feeling more and more foolish. He saw a group of busy chipmunks, chattering excitedly as they unearthed a secret stash of buried acorns. They worked together, their tiny paws moving quickly, filling their cheek pouches until they looked like puffy pillows. Squeaky wanted to join them, to show off his own great skill. But then he remembered the empty shell resting in his paw, and his cheeks burned a little. He couldn't just not carry it. Professor Hoot had told him to. So he clutched it tighter, trying to make it less noticeable. The forest seemed to be brimming with busy, successful creatures. He saw a family, field mice, carefully gathering wild berries, their tiny baskets overflowing with juicy red and purple gems. A cheerful blue jay swooped down, its beak full of glistening insects, ready to feed its hungry chicks. Everyone seemed to know exactly what to do, how to be full, how to collect. And there he was, Squeaky, the little squirrel with the big dreams, just carrying a hollow piece of wood. A deep sigh escaped him, a sound filled with the worry that he was somehow missing the whole point, that he was failing already. He walked past a bustling anthill where tiny ants were diligently carrying crumbs much bigger than themselves, forming a long, unwavering line. They seemed so strong, so purposeful. Squeaky compared them to himself, feeling small and directionless. The empty shell felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of the questions it held. How could something empty, that couldn't even hold a single crumb, be the key to his success? His fear of not being the best, of not finding the great nut of prosperity, grew a little bigger, suddenly lost in his thoughts, and not watching where his tiny paws were going. Squeaky tripped over a gnarled root that stretched unexpectedly across his path. He stumbled, his legs tangling, and for a moment he was a blur of emerald eyes and flailing fur. The empty acorn shell flew from his grasp, tumbling end over end. It bounced lightly off a soft patch of moss, then rolled down a small, grassy slope. It bounced again, almost like a playful ball, off a curious mushroom, and then came to a gentle stop beside a bright, cheerful daisy. Squeaky watched it, half in alarm, half in surprise. He untangled his paws and sat up, a little dizzy. He looked at the shell, lying innocently by the daisy. It looked happy, almost. It had bounced and rolled without breaking, without spilling, because there was nothing inside to spill. A little giggle, soft as a rustle of leaves, bubbled up from Squeaky's throat. He reached out a paw, picked up the shell, and turned it over. Its bounciness, its complete lack of breakage, was rather funny. He tried to bounce it gently himself, and indeed, it bounced right back up into his paw. He giggled again, a clearer, brighter sound this time. Despite his lingering confusion and the little pangs of fear about his big dream, that unexpected bounce, that silly tumble, brought a tiny spark of wonder to his heart. The shell was empty, yes, but it was also surprisingly resilient and even a little playful. It had held nothing, and so it had lost nothing in its fall. Squeaky held the shell a little differently now, not as a burden, but as a peculiar companion as he continued his journey through the bright, busy. Squeaky continued his journey through the forest, the hollow acorn shell resting lightly in his paw. He was still a little puzzled by it, but after that funny tumble, it felt less like a heavy burden and more like a curious, silent companion. The sun climbed higher, painting golden patches on the forest floor, and the air grew warm and peaceful. Squeaky hummed a little tune, a soft, happy sound as he imagined all the nuts he would find for the great nut of prosperity, even with his empty shell. Suddenly, without any warning, the sky decided to play a trick. A tiny, silver cloud floated right above Squeaky, and then, without a single rumble of thunder, it opened up. Not a big, stormy downpour, but a very gentle, sparkling rain shower began to fall. The drops were so fine, like tiny diamonds falling. From the sky, they whispered softly on the leaves, a quiet shush, shush, shush. Squeaky blinked his big, sparkling eyes in surprise. He wasn't afraid of rain, but he didn't want his fur to get too wet. He scampered quickly towards a large, leafy fern, its broad fronds offering a perfect green umbrella. He tucked himself under, feeling safe and dry. As he waited for the gentle shower to pass, Squeaky looked at the smooth, hollow acorn shell he still held. And what do you think he saw? Inside the shell, clinging to its smooth, curved surface, were a few shimmering drops of water. They sparkled like tiny jewels, catching the faint sunlight that peeked through the leaves. The empty shell, usually so useless for holding things, had caught a few of these precious drops. It was a small pool, no bigger than a dewdrop, but it was perfectly clear and still. Just then, Squeaky noticed something else. At the very edge of the fern's frond, where the water was gathering, a tiny red shape was moving slowly. It was a ladybug, smaller than Squeaky's smallest toe, with beautiful black spots. But this ladybug wasn't buzzing happily or exploring. It was struggling. Its tiny legs moved slowly, and its bright red shell seemed a little dull. It was trying to reach a drop of water clinging to a leaf, but it couldn't quite make it. It stretched and stretched, its little antennae wiggling weakly, but the drop was just out of reach. Squeaky watched, his emerald eyes wide with concern. The little ladybug looked so tired, so very parched. It looked so sad, almost ready to give up. A warm, soft feeling began to bubble up inside Squeaky, a feeling that had nothing to do with nuts or success. It was a feeling of wanting to help, without even thinking about his big dream or his nut-finding quest. Squeaky slowly, very carefully, stretched out his paw. He held the acorn shell, with its tiny pool of sparkling water, right towards the struggling ladybug. He brought it close, close enough so the ladybug could easily reach. The ladybug paused, its antennae twitching. It seemed to sense the coolness of the water. Then, with a tiny, hopeful wiggle, it slowly, slowly crawled towards the shell. Its little head dipped, and it began to drink the water. Squeaky watched, holding his breath, his little paw steady. He could see the ladybug's tiny mouth moving, taking in the refreshing drops. Slowly, as the ladybug drank, Its dull red shell seemed to regain its shine, and its tiny legs moved with a little more strength. When it had finished, the ladybug lifted its head. It paused for a moment, then looked right at Squeaky, tiny black eyes. It didn't speak, of course, but Squeaky felt a warmth, a deep, gentle thank you, radiating from the little creature. Then, with a happy little stretch of its wings, the ladybug buzzed softly and flew off, a bright red speck disappearing into the green. Squeaky sat there for a moment, the empty acorn shell now truly empty of water, but filled with a new, wonderful feeling. A surprising warmth spread through him, right from his tiny paws all the way to the tip of his twitching tail. It was a feeling so pure and so good, a feeling he hadn't known before. It was a feeling of joy and wonder, completely different. The excitement of finding a big nut. This feeling was gentle, like the rain itself, and it settled softly in his heart. This feeling was better than finding any nut, even the biggest, shiniest nut in the whole forest. It was better than another walnut to his bulging pouch. He realized, with a soft flutter in his chest, that helping another creature, offering something he had even from his empty shell, brought a kind of happiness that felt truly magical. He looked at the acorn shell, now empty once more, but no longer seeming useless. It had held nothing, but it had given everything to a thirsty friend. And that, Squeaky thought, felt like the most wonderful kind of. With the gentle memory of the little ladybug's grateful flutter still warm in his heart, Squeaky continued his journey. The sun had returned, painting the forest floor with soft, dappled patterns of light and shadow. He still carried his empty acorn shell, but now it felt different. It no longer seemed foolish or useless. After all, it had held that precious water for his tiny, thirsty friend. He carried it with a new kind of thoughtful wonder, his big, sparkling emerald eyes constantly scanning the forest, not just for nuts, but for anything new, anything interesting. As Squeaky scampered along a winding path, a soft breeze began to rustle through the leaves high above. It wasn't a strong, blustery wind, but a gentle, playful breath, like the forest was sighing happily. Squeaky noticed something peculiar as the breeze swept past him. When the wind passed through the hollow opening of his acorn shell, it made a soft, melodic hum. It was a faint sound, like a tiny, sleepy bumblebee, or a distant, quiet song. Hum. It went, then whoosh, then hum again. Squeaky stopped. His whiskers twitched with curiosity. He held the acorn shell closer to his ear, tilting it just so. And there it was again, a soft, almost magical sound, clearer now. It sounded like the wind was singing a secret lullaby just for him. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening intently. It was the wind, yes, but it sounded special. It sounded like the wind weavers, those ancient invisible beings whispered about in old forest tales, who spun the very air into beautiful, unseen tapestries of sound. He walked a little further, holding the shell like a tiny musical instrument, letting the breeze play its gentle tunes. The sounds changed with the wind's speed. Sometimes it was a low, peaceful hum, like a bear snoring softly in its den. Other times, it was a high, delicate whistle, like tiny birds chirping their good nights. Squeaky giggled, a soft, happy sound, as he imagined the wind trying out different melodies. He tried to hum along, his tiny squirrel voice a cheerful addition to the forest's gentle music. He felt a deep sense of wonder, watching how something so simple, so empty, could make such beautiful sounds when touched by the wind. As he continued, drawn by the enchanting music of his shell, Squeaky noticed movement around him. A group of butterflies, their wings painted with soft, silvery patterns that seemed to glow faintly, began to flutter closer. These weren't just any butterflies. These were moon moths, creatures of the twilight, usually only seen when the sun had truly set. But here they were, in the middle of the day, drawn by the gentle, magical sound coming from Squeaky's little shell. They danced around him, their movements slow and graceful, like tiny dancers on invisible strings. They seemed sleepy, their delicate wings fluttering lazily, as if the hum from the shell was wrapping them in a cozy, dreamlike embrace. One moon moth, with wings like brushed velvet, gently landed on the very edge of Squeaky's acorn shell, its tiny legs barely making a sound. It rested there for a long moment, its antennae twitching ever so slightly, as if it, too, was listening to the shell's soft melody. Squeaky felt a warmth spread through him once more, different warmth of helping the ladybug, but just as wonderful. This was the warmth of awe, of discovering something truly magical and unexpected. He kept the shell to his ear, marveling at how these shy twilight creatures were drawn to the sound. He felt a strong connection, not just to the tiny moon resting on his shell, but to the wind and to the forest itself. It was as if the empty shell was helping him understand a secret language, a beautiful song that had always been there, but he had never truly heard before. He carefully walked deeper, into a quiet, secluded grove, the moon moths swirling around him like a silent, shimmering cloud. The air here felt different, softer, filled with unspoken stories. He held the shell up again, letting the wind flow through. The sounds were like whispers from the forest's memory, telling tales of ancient trees and sleepy rivers and stars. That fell like dew. He remembered Professor Hoot calling it a vessel of whispers. Now, Squeaky understood a little more. It wasn't just the wind making the sound. It was like the shell was catching the forest's own whispers, holding them for him to hear. He giggled again, a joyful sound, as he imagined the shell as a tiny ear trumpet, listening to all the secret conversations of the trees and the air. He felt so peaceful, so connected. All his worries about being the best nut finder, about finding the great nut of prosperity, seemed to fade away for a little while. This unexpected magic, this quiet wonder, filled him in a way that nuts never could. His heart felt light, almost as if it, too, had become hollow and open, allowing the forest's gentle whispers to fill it with joy and wonder. He realized sometimes the most useful tools weren't those that helped you get things, but those that helped you listen and connect to the beautiful world around you. The moon moths stayed with him for a long time, fluttering gently, their silvery wings catching the filtered sunlight. Squeaky didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what other secrets his empty shell might reveal, but for now he was content, simply listening to the whispers on the wind. A tiny squirrel in a magical forest, filled with a quiet, glowing happiness. He knew, deep in his heart, that this little acorn shell was a very special gift. The soft, melodic hum of the wind weavers, caught in Squeaky's hollow acorn shell, seemed to guide his tiny paws deeper into the whispering woods. The moon moths, those gentle, silvery dancers, fluttered around him for a while, their quiet presence a comforting lullaby. Squeaky felt lighter, happier, filled with a peaceful wonder that had pushed away his earlier worries about nut finding. He kept the shell close, listening to its soft songs, feeling like he was walking with a secret friend. The afternoon sun began to dip, casting long, gentle shadows, and the air grew cooler, carrying the sweet scent of damp earth and late-blooming flowers. Squeaky noticed the moon moths, one by one, softly drifting away, seeking their own quiet places to rest as twilight approached. Soon he was walking alone, the forest growing quieter around him, save for the gentle hum of his shell and the occasional hoot of a distant owl, as the last sliver of golden light faded from the highest branches. Squeaky noticed something truly extraordinary on the forest floor. Hidden beneath a canopy of ancient ferns, a faint, soft light pulsed. It wasn't the steady glow of a firefly, nor the sharp gleam of a quartz crystal. These were tiny, smooth stones, no bigger than Squeaky's thumb, each one shimmering with an inner light. They were luminous moonglow shards, tiny pieces of captured moonlight, legendary in the oldest forest tales. They were said to mark paths to forgotten forest secrets, places where the forest's magic slept deeply. Squeaky's big, emerald eyes widened, reflecting the soft glow of the pebbles. He had heard the whispers of these magical shards in bedtime stories, but he had never ever seen them with his own eyes. A thrill of excitement shot through him, making his little whiskers twitch. This wasn't just a path. It felt like an invitation, a secret whispered just for him. His heart began to beat a little faster, a tiny drum of anticipation in his chest. The glowing pebbles formed a delicate, winding trail, leading deeper and deeper into a part of the forest Squeaky didn't know. This was not the familiar path to the nut trees, nor the sunny meadow where he played hide-and-seek. This was wilder, older. The trees here were taller, their branches reaching like ancient arms, and the shadows seemed to hug the ground more closely. This was the edge of the Twilight Grotto, a place rumored to hold powerful, slumbering magic. A tiny tremor of fear rippled through Squeaky. His paws hesitated. What if it was too dark? What if there were scary, unseen things lurking in the deepening shadows? He was a little squirrel, after all, and venturing into the unknown was a brave thing to do. His tail, usually held high with confidence, drooped just a tiny bit. He thought about turning back, about finding his cozy hollow, but then he looked at the glowing path again. The soft, beautiful light of the moonglow shards seemed to beckon him, promising a truly grand adventure, and the little acorn shell in his paw seemed to hum with a gentle encouragement, as if it too was eager to explore. His curiosity won. It sparkled brighter than any fear. "Okay," he whispered to himself, his voice a tiny squeak of determination. Just a little bit further. He took a deep breath, and with his hollow acorn shell swinging lightly at his side, almost like a tiny lantern, he began to follow the luminous trail. The path twisted and turned, weaving through thickets of shimmering ferns and under the heavy, silent boughs of ancient moss-covered trees. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of hidden springs. Squeaky felt a growing sense of wonder with every step. The forest here was truly magical. Sometimes the moonglow shards would blink twice, like tiny eyes, or even briefly, dim before flaring brightly again, as if guiding him specifically. This made Squeaky giggle nervously, a soft, breathless sound. It was like the path itself was alive. He suddenly stopped. One of the glowing pebbles, normally a steady beacon, was now swirling its light in a curious pattern, like a tiny whirlpool of silver. Squeaky tilted his head, trying to understand. Was it telling him something? He carefully stepped closer, peering at the shimmering stone. As he watched, the pattern shifted, and the pebble seemed to point directly towards a massive, ancient oak tree. Its trunk, wider than Squeaky, was tall. Squeaky murmured. This was a twist he hadn't expected. The pebble path wasn't just a line, it was a living puzzle. He looked at the giant oak, its bark grooved with centuries of stories. It looked very old and very quiet. A new tremor of fear mixed with even more excitement fluttered in his chest. Was this part of the secret? Would he find another clue to the great nut of prosperity here? Or was it something entirely different, something even more wondrous and perhaps a little scary? He felt a deep sense of commitment to his journey now. He had come too far to turn back. He carefully navigated around the swirling pebble, his emerald eyes fixed on the ancient oak. The hollow acorn shell, so light in his paw, seemed to hum. A different tune now, a soft, anticipatory melody, as if it sensed the adventure ahead. Squeaky, tiny but determined, took another brave step into the deepening shadows of the twilight grotto, ready for whatever secrets the glowing path and the wise old forest would reveal. He knew, deep in his heart, that this journey was becoming far more interesting than just finding nuts. It was becoming an adventure of discovery, of hidden magic, and of finding out just how brave a little squirrel could be. Squeaky, with his little acorn shell swinging lightly at his side, followed the shimmering trail of moonglow shards deeper into the twilight grotto. The glowing pebbles seemed to pulse with an ancient magic, leading him away from the familiar paths of the forest. The air grew cooler here, smelling of damp earth and unseen wonders. He felt a tingle of excitement dancing in his whiskers, mixed with a tiny flutter of fear for this unknown adventure. The path twisted and turned, winding around enormous moss-covered boulders that rose like sleeping giants from the forest floor. The trees grew closer and closer together, their branches weaving a thick, green canopy overhead, making the sunlight even softer, almost like a gentle dream. Soon, the moonglow shards led Squeaky right into what looked like a wall of living green. It was a dense, mossy maze. Not just ordinary moss, but deep, velvety green moss that grew so thick and tall it formed swirling walls, much higher than Squeaky. The air inside the maze felt different, hushed and still, as if the moss itself was listening. The moss walls gently shifted, swaying ever so slightly, as if they were alive and breathing with the forest. It was a magical defense, designed to puzzle and protect. Squeaky blinked his big, sparkling eyes. He had never seen anything quite like it. He stepped inside, following the faint glow of the moonglow shards, which now seemed to be twinkling like tiny mischievous eyes just ahead. The maze instantly embraced him in its soft, green embrace. He turned right, then left, then right again. The mossy walls were so soft, he couldn't hear his own tiny paw steps. After a few turns, he realized something. The path he had just taken seemed to have closed behind him, the moss swaying gently to fill the space. A cold wave of panic washed over Squeaky. His tail stiffened. He tried to remember which way he came in, but all the mossy walls looked exactly the same. He tried another path, then another. Each turn looked just like the last. He spun in a tiny circle, his head whipping from side to side, his heart beating like a hummingbird's wings. "Oh no," he squeaked, his voice barely audible in the hushed maze. "I'm lost." He imagined being stuck in the soft, green walls forever, never finding his way out, never finding the great nut of prosperity. A tiny tear even pricked the corner of one sparkling eye. He tried to climb a mossy wall, hoping to see over it, but the moss was too soft, too slippery. He slid right back down, landing with a comical puff of dust. He giggled nervously, a soft, shaky sound, as he picked himself up. This maze was definitely playing tricks. He slumped against a soft, mossy wall, feeling tired and defeated, his little shoulders slumping. He was about to give up, to just sit down and wait, when he heard it, a tiny, distressed squeak. So faint, so small, almost lost in the stillness of the maze. It wasn't the sound of a happy squirrel or a playful chipmunk. This was a sound of absolute fear, a desperate little plea. Squeaky's big eyes instantly snapped open, and his ears swiveled, trying to pinpoint the sound. There it was again, a shivering, distressed squeak, closer this time. He pushed his own fear aside. Someone else needed help. He followed the sound, carefully parting the soft mossy walls. Around a bend, in a small, damp hollow, he saw it. A tiny, wobbly baby mouse, smaller than his thumb, lay huddled on a patch of cold earth. Its fur was ruffled, and its tiny nose was twitching nervously. Its eyes, even smaller than Squeaky's, were wide and filled with pure terror. This wasn't just any baby mouse. This was a sparkle sprite, a tiny, ethereal creature of light, and its usual shimmering glow was almost completely dimmed by its fear. It was all alone, clearly separated from its family. And trembling, Squeaky's heart went out to the little sparkle sprite. He remembered the parched ladybug in the gentle rain, and how good it felt to help. This tiny creature was even more vulnerable. He knew he couldn't leave it. He carefully, very gently, approached the trembling sprite. "Hello," Squeaky whispered, his voice as soft as possible so as not to scare it. "Are you lost?" Sparkle Sprite trembled even harder, but it seemed to sense Squeaky's kindness. Its faint light flickered. Squeaky looked around. The mossy ground was cold and damp. The little sprite needed warmth and a safe place to hide from any scary shadows that might creep into the maze. His eyes fell on the smooth, hollow acorn shell. He was still holding an idea, soft and warm as a summer breeze, bloomed in his mind. The shell was empty, yes, but because it was empty, it was also open. It could hold something precious and fragile. Very carefully, Squeaky knelt down. He gently placed his hollow acorn shell on the cold earth, turning its opening towards the shivering sparkle sprite. He then nudged a few soft, dry leaves nearby with his nose, arranging them inside the shell to make a tiny, cozy bed. "Here," Squeaky whispered, his voice full of compassion. "You can hide here. It's warm and safe." The sparkle sprite hesitated for a moment, its tiny eyes still wide with fear. But the warmth of Squeaky's voice and the inviting softness of the leafy bed inside the shell seemed to draw it in. Slowly, with a tiny brave shuffle, the little sparkle sprite crawled into the acorn shell. It snuggled down into the soft leaves, its tiny body seeming to relax as the small, enclosed space offered it a sense of security. Squeaky watched, his heart swelling with a gentle joy. As the sparkle sprite settled, its ethereal light, which had been so dim, began to glow brighter. First a faint glimmer, then a steady, gentle radiance, filling the inside of the shell with a soft, comforting luminescence. It was as if the sprite's light was flickering back to brilliance, a visual representation of the fear melting away, replaced by safety and warmth. It was a truly touching sight. Squeaky sat patiently beside the shell, his paw gently resting near its opening, keeping watch. He didn't move, just waited, listening to the soft, even breathing of the little sprite within. He tried to think of a funny story to tell it, something to make it feel even better. He remembered his funny tumble from the day before. "You know," he whispered softly to the shell, "this shell, it can really bounce." I learned that earlier, when I wasn't looking where I was going, and it flew right out of my paw and bounced off a big mushroom." He giggled softly, hoping the funny thought would reach the sprite inside. Minutes turned into what felt like a long time, but Squeaky didn't mind. His earlier panic about being lost had completely vanished, replaced by a quiet, fierce protectiveness. He knew he wouldn't leave the little sparkle sprite until its family returned. And just as the light from the sparkle sprite filled the shell with a comforting glow, Squeaky felt his own heart filling with a new understanding. The shell, empty just moments ago, was now full of warmth, safety, and a quiet, profound love. It was amazing how something that seemed to hold nothing could hold so much. And that, he realized, was a kind of magic more wonderful than any nut. Squeaky remained beside the acorn shell, where the little sparkle sprite slept safely, its light glowing softly within the cozy, leafy bed. The mossy maze, once a place of panic, now felt calm and still, warmed by the sprite's gentle luminescence. Squeaky didn't feel lost anymore. He felt purposeful, a little guardian in the heart of the magical forest. He even drifted off to sleep himself, curled beside the shell, his emerald eyes softly closed, dreaming sweet dreams as the quiet hours of night slowly turned to the soft blush of dawn. A new sound began to stir in the forest. It wasn't the gentle bird calls or the rustle of playful breezes. It was a low, distant rumble, like sleepy giants stirring far away. The air grew heavy and still, the usual cheerful forest smells replaced by a damp, earthy scent that tickled Squeaky's nose even in his sleep. Just as the first hint of morning light painted the sky, Squeaky awoke to a soft, excited squeaking. The little sparkle sprite inside the shell was stirring, its light now pulsing with joyful energy. And then Squeaky saw them. Two larger sparkle sprites, shimmering with worry, were carefully picking their way through the shifting moss, their own lights blinking frantically. They were the little sprite's parents. With a delighted squeak, the baby sparkle sprite zipped out of Squeaky's shell and scurried straight into the embrace of its parents. They danced with relief, their lights swirling together in a brilliant display of happiness. The parent sprites sent waves of warmth and gratitude towards Squeaky, their tiny forms bowing in thanks. Before they all scurried off together, a shimmering trail of joy disappearing into the gentle morning light. Squeaky watched them go, his heart full of a quiet, warm happiness. He smiled, truly understanding the special magic of his empty shell. But the forest's gentle morning was short-lived. A sudden, powerful roar echoed through the trees, a sound that made the very ground tremble. It wasn't the friendly rumble of a passing badger, or the playful growl of a curious fox. This was the deep, booming voice of a storm. A shadow storm born from the collective anxieties of the forest creatures, threatening to steal the forest's light and joy. Squeaky startled, his big, sparkling eyes wide with alarm. The wind, which had been so gentle just hours before, now howled through the maze, whipping the mossy walls around. Rain began to fall, not in gentle drops, but in thick, drumming sheets, pounding against the leaves and branches. He could hear the crashing sounds of branches breaking, the loud splashes as puddles grew into small rivers, and the frightened chirps and cries of other forest creatures seeking shelter. A wave of deep fear washed over Squeaky, chilling him more than the cold rain. This was unlike any storm he had ever known. This felt like the forest itself was hurting. He peered out from the maze, past the swirling moss walls. The beautiful, vibrant greens of the trees seemed dulled, muted by the heavy, grey sky. He saw his friends, the squirrels and chipmunks, scrambling frantically, trying to save their precious nut stashes. But the wind was too strong. Nuts, gathered with such care, were being scattered far and wide, tumbling helplessly across the forest floor. Small branches, weighed down by the pouring rain and battered by the wind, snapped and fell with loud cracks. It was heartbreaking to watch. Squeaky felt a deep wave of sadness for his friends. Their hard work, their cozy winter preparations, were being undone by the furious storm. He saw Flick, usually so proud of his nut pile, now looking utterly forlorn as the wind tore away his carefully collected treasures. Pip's little wagon, which had been so full and cheerful, lay on its side, empty and sad. The forest, which was usually so full of life and happy sounds, was now filled with the roar of the wind and the mournful drips of the rain. He worried about his own cozy hollow. Was his precious nut collection safe? Was the great nut of prosperity, wherever it might be, protected from this terrible storm? His own ambition felt small and unimportant compared to the widespread sorrow he now saw. Then, through a brief parting in the wind-whipped rain, Squeaky spotted something else. It was tiny, barely visible amidst the fallen leaves and debris. A little sapling. Not just any sapling, but a Heartwood sapling, a rare nascent tree, destined to become a powerful protector of the forest. Its growth connected to the forest's very health. This sapling usually stood tall and strong, its leaves a vibrant green. But now, it was struggling. Its tiny, tender leaves were drooping, plastered to its slender stem by the heavy rain. It was trying so hard to stand upright, but the wind pushed it, bending it almost to the ground. It looked so fragile, so vulnerable, clinging to life amidst the storm's fury. Squeaky felt a strong, deep pull in his chest. This little sapling, fighting for its life, was crying out for help, not with a sound, but with its whole struggling being. He felt a profound empathy for it. He knew, instinctively, that if this little sapling was lost, a part of the forest's hope would be lost too. He remembered how useful his empty shell was for the lost sparkle sprite. It had provided a safe, warm hideaway, a tiny cocoon of protection. His mind, usually so focused on gathering and filling, now turned to a different kind of purpose. The shell was empty, yes, but because it was open, it could hold safety. It could offer comfort. A new kind of excitement, not for nuts, but for helping, began to bubble within him. It mingled with the lingering fear of the storm, but this excitement felt stronger, warmer. He knew what he had to do. His heart swelled with a quiet determination, pushing away the sadness and the fear. The little acorn shell had shown him its kindness, its melodies, and its ability to offer shelter. Now, in the face of the great shadow storm, he understood that its most important power lay in its ability to give and to protect. The fierce shadow storm raged, its powerful winds howling and its heavy rain drumming against the forest floor. Squeaky, tucked safely inside the mossy maze, watched with wide, worried eyes as nuts scattered and branches broke. His heart ached for his friends, and a deep sadness settled over him as he saw the little Heartwood sapling struggling against the furious wind. Its tiny leaves drooped, clinging weakly to its stem, bending lower and lower, but then a clear thought, bright and steady like a single flickering star in the stormy sky, came to Squeaky. He remembered the little sparkle sprite, lost and trembling in the cold. His empty acorn shell had become a cozy, safe hideaway, a warm little home for the scared sprite. If it could protect a tiny mouse-like sprite, maybe, just maybe, It could help this struggling sapling to dot thinking quickly. His paws already moving with a newfound purpose, Squeaky began to look around. He needed the softest, warmest things he could find inside the maze. The mossy walls themselves were wonderfully soft, like a plush green carpet. He gently, very gently, tugged at some of the freshest, most vibrant green moss, pulling off small, cushiony pieces. He gathered fallen leaves that had drifted into the maze, choosing only the biggest, driest, and most velvety ones. Some were a soft brown, others a rich crimson. Still holding the gentle warmth of the earth, he carefully, with utmost precision, began to place these treasures into his empty acorn shell. First, a layer of the softest moss, forming a plump, springy mattress. Then, he arranged the velvety leaves on top, overlapping them like tiny blankets, creating a cozy, warm bed. He pressed them down gently with his nose, making sure there were no gaps, no cold spots. His little heart pounded with a mix of concentration and excitement. He was making a home, a tiny, perfect shelter, for a precious little tree. Once the bed was ready, Squeaky, his emerald eyes fixed on the struggling Heartwood sapling outside the maze, scurried over to it. The wind pushed hard, trying to shove him away, and the rain plastered his fur to his body, making him shiver. But he didn't stop. The sapling, so frail and small, seemed to whisper a silent plea for help, and Squeaky knew he had to reach it. He braced his tiny body against the wind, one paw gripping a sturdy root, the other reaching out towards the sapling with immense care. Using both his paws and his nose, Squeaky gently, ever so gently, loosened the earth around the sapling's delicate roots. He worked slowly, mindful of every tiny rootlet. He knew how important roots were. They were like the sapling's anchor, its way of drinking and standing strong. He murmured soft, comforting words to the sapling, as if it could understand. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered, his voice a tiny, brave squeak. "Squeaky is here." Then, with the most tender touch he could manage, he carefully, slowly lifted the struggling sapling. Its roots, thin as spider silk, trembled slightly. Squeaky felt a profound emotional connection, a deep responsibility for this tiny, living thing. It was like holding a tiny piece of the forest's future in his paws. His heart ached for its struggle, but swelled with hope as he prepared to give it a safe haven. He brought the sapling carefully to his prepared acorn shell. He gently, ever so gently, placed the struggling sapling's roots inside the soft, warm bed he had made. The cozy moss and leaves wrapped around the roots like a warm embrace. The acorn shell, sturdy and round, became a perfect little shield, protecting the delicate sapling from the fierce wind and the drumming rain. It was a perfect fit. The sapling, nestled within the shell, seemed to sigh with relief. Its drooping leaves lifted just a tiny bit, and its stem, once bent almost double, straightened slightly, finding strength in its new, tiny shelter. Squeaky sat beside the shell, his wet fur plastered down, but his heart full. He could feel the tiny vibrations of the storm outside, the relentless pushing of the wind, but inside the shell, the sapling was safe. He watched over it, his big eyes unwavering. He imagined the little sapling resting, gathering its strength, just like he did in his own cozy hollow. He stayed there, a tiny sentinel against the roaring storm, feeling a deep, abiding sense of purpose. It was a strange kind of success. It wasn't about finding nuts or having the biggest pile. It was about giving, about protecting, about using his empty shell to make a difference. He didn't have to fill it with nuts to make it useful. He filled it with kindness, with care, with soft moss and warm leaves, and that felt more valuable than any treasure. The fear he had felt for the storm, for his friends' scattered nuts, for his own place in the forest, slowly began to melt away, replaced by this quiet, powerful feeling of having done something truly good. He thought of the 7 days Professor Hoot had given him. This was only the 3rd day, and already his empty shell had helped a thirsty ladybug, resonated with the mysterious wind weavers, provided shelter for a lost sparkle sprite, and now cradled a struggling heartwood sapling. Each time the shell had been empty, but each time it had been filled with something intangible and wonderful. It was a secret kind of magic, a magic of being open and ready to help. Squeaky knew with a quiet certainty that this strange, hollow acorn was truly a gift, helping him discover something far more important than any legendary nut. The shadow storm eventually passed, leaving the forest soaked in quiet, but not broken. The wind had died down to a gentle sigh, and the heavy rain had softened to a gentle, cleansing drizzle. Squeaky, tired but triumphant, remained beside the acorn shell, where the little heartwood sapling nestled safely in its bed of moss and leaves. The sapling's leaves, once drooping, now stood a little straighter, and a faint, hopeful green seemed to return to them. Squeaky felt a deep sense of peace. His little fur was wet, his paws were muddy, and he hadn't found a single nut all day. But his heart was overflowing. He had helped the thirsty ladybug, listened to the forest's whispers with the moon moths, given shelter to the lost sparkle sprite until its parents found it, and now he had protected this precious sapling. Each time his empty shell had been the key, not by holding things, but by being open as the last clouds drifted away, allowing a sliver of soft evening light to touch the forest floor. Squeaky felt a familiar presence. He looked up, his big, sparkling emerald eyes blinking softly. There, perched on a branch just above him, his starlit feathers shimmering gently, was Professor Hoot. The wise old owl looked at Squeaky with a soft, knowing smile, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. He hadn't made a sound as he arrived, as silent as a falling feather. Little Squeaky, Professor Hoot hooted softly, his voice like the gentle rustle of old leaves. "You have learned much." Squeaky felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of pride that wasn't boastful, but deep and quiet. He looked down at the acorn shell, cradling the little sapling. "Professor Hoot," he squeaked, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "The shell, it wasn't what I thought. It didn't find nuts, but it did so much more." He looked back up at Professor Hoot, his eyes full of new understanding. "It helped the ladybug drink, and it showed me the wind's songs. And it kept the little sparkle sprite safe, and now it's protecting this sapling from the storm." Professor Hoot nodded slowly, his wise eyes full of gentle approval. "Indeed, Squeaky, indeed." He ruffled his feathers softly. "When I first gave you the acorn, you thought it was useless. You thought it could not help you become the best nut finder, because it was empty." Squeaky remembered his disappointment, his confusion, his feeling of foolishness when he first held the hollow shell. He remembered trying to put a pebble in it, then a leaf, only for them to fall right out. He had wanted a tool that would help him take and gather more. He had wanted to fill his pouch, to show how much he could collect. "Yes, Professor," Squeaky admitted, his voice a tiny whisper. "I thought it was just empty. A burden, Professor." Hoot leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming even softer, more profound. "Squeaky, the acorn was empty, yes, but precisely because it was empty, it was open. And because it was open, it could hold so many truly good things. Squeaky listened intently, his little head tilted. He thought of the clear, precious water it had held for the thirsty ladybug, saving her. He thought of the soft, melodic whispers, of the wind, singing secrets he had never heard before, drawing the sleepy moon moths to him. He thought of the cozy, comforting warmth it had offered to the trembling sparkle sprite, a safe haven until its family could find it. And now, he thought of how it was cradling the vulnerable Heartwood Sapling, protecting its tiny roots from the fierce shadow storm. It held kindness, Professor, Squeaky murmured, a new realization dawning on him, making his emerald eyes sparkle with understanding and comfort and songs. Professor Hoot gave a soft, happy hoot. Exactly, little one. You see, true success isn't about how much you grab and hold on to, no matter how shiny or plentiful it seems. It's not about how much you can gather for yourself, or how big your pile becomes. Squeaky thought about Flick's proud, bulging pouch, and Pip's full wagon, now scattered and empty by the storm. He remembered his own mountain of nuts in his hollow, and the worry he'd felt about making it bigger. That kind of success had felt so important, but now it seemed smaller somehow. No, Professor Hoot continued gently, his voice flowing like a peaceful stream. True success, Squeaky, is about how much good you can share with the world around you. It's about how much kindness you can offer. And, perhaps most importantly, it's about how much kindness and wonder you can let in to your own heart. By being open to the needs of others and the magic that is always present in the world. Squeaky looked at the acorn shell, no longer a burden, but a precious treasure. It was still empty in the way that it couldn't hold nuts, but it was brimming with the memories of kindness given and received, of beauty discovered, and of life protected. He understood now. The journey with the empty shell hadn't been about finding the great nut of prosperity for himself, but about becoming, in a way, a custodian of prosperity for others. It was about being a vessel, not for taking, but for giving. A profound sense of warmth, even deeper than before, spread through Squeaky's entire being. It wasn't the fleeting excitement of finding a big nut. This was a lasting, quiet joy, a sense of rightness and belonging. He wasn't just a nut finder, he was a helper, a listener, a protector, and that felt like the truest, most important success. Of all, he looked up at Professor Hoot, his heart filled with gratitude and a brand new, glowing purpose. He wasn't just chasing a dream, he was living a dream of being kind and open and truly successful in the ways that mattered most. The last gentle drops of rain from the shadow storm had stopped, and a peaceful hush settled over the forest. The air smelled fresh and clean, and a soft, golden glow from the setting sun began to filter through the wet leaves. Squeaky sat beside the acorn shell, where the little Heartwood Sapling now rested safely, its tiny leaves perking up with renewed hope, shielded by the shell and the moss Squeaky had placed around it. Professor Hoot's wise words, like gentle echoes, swirled in Squeaky's mind, filling him with a warmth that was even cozier than his softest moss bed. True success isn't about how much you grab, Professor Hoot had said, but how much good you can share and how much kindness you can let in. Squeaky looked at the acorn shell, resting steadily on the ground, a little beacon of protection for the sapling. It wasn't empty at all. It was full of the memory of water for a tiny, thirsty ladybug, full of the gentle songs of the wind that drew sleepy moon moths to dance around him, full of the safe, warm comfort it had given to the lost sparkle sprite until its parents arrived, a truly happy reunion. and now it was full of the quiet strength and protection it offered to the precious Heartwood Sapling. His eyes, big and sparkling, were wide with a new, wonderful understanding. The empty shell had indeed made him see the world differently. Before, his eyes had been so focused on finding nuts, on how much he could gather and collect. He had rushed past so many things, his little paws busy, his mind set only on his own big goal. But the empty shell, this strange, simple gift, had slowed him down. It had made him stop and listen, made him stop and notice. It had made him open. He started noticing all the small acts of kindness and generosity happening around him in the forest, things he had always missed before. He saw a busy beetle, no bigger than his thumb, carefully nudging a fallen berry towards a smaller, slower beetle that was struggling to reach it. The tiny beetle gave a grateful twitch of its antennae before happily nibbling the treat. Squeaky smiled. It was such a small thing, but it made a big difference to that little beetle. He looked over at a family of plump field mice, usually so quick to gather and hoard. But now, after the storm, he saw the mother mouse, her fur still damp, leaving a small pile of freshly found seeds at the base of a shivering, skinny young sparrow's nest. The sparrow, ruffled and tired, gratefully chirped its thanks as its little babies eagerly poked their heads out. The mouse didn't wait for thanks. She simply offered and then quietly moved on, her heart full. Squeaky felt a deep, warm feeling spread through his chest. It was a silent, gentle giving. He watched a group of industrious ants who, after their earlier frantic efforts, were now working together to lift a heavy, broken twig. They weren't just carrying crumbs. They were clearing the path for everyone. Each tiny ant pulled and pushed, not just for themselves, but for the good of the whole line, creating order out of the storm's chaos. Squeaky had always seen their busy lines, but he had never truly seen their cooperation, their shared effort, their quiet support for each other. He looked at the towering oak tree under which he had sheltered, its old branches creaking softly. He noticed how its deepest roots reached out, not just for its own food, but to intertwine with the roots of smaller trees and bushes around it. These were the forest's helping roots, invisible threads that shared water and nutrients, especially after a storm. The oak wasn't just standing strong by itself. It was helping all its neighbors to stand strong too. The entire forest, Squeaky realized, was one big, connected family, always ready to help and support one another. He realized the forest thrived not just on individual strength, not just on how many nuts one creature could gather, but on connection and openness. It thrived on the way everyone, from the smallest beetle to the tallest oak, helped each other, shared with each other, and listened to each other. It thrived on the kindness that flowed like a hidden stream through every root and branch. Squeaky thought of his own big dream, his quest for the great nut of prosperity. Before, he had imagined finding it all by himself, being the hero who brought endless bounty. But now, his understanding had shifted. He knew that the true prosperity of the forest wasn't just in one magical nut. It was in the daily acts of caring, in the shared laughter, in the comforting whispers, and in the quiet protection. The great nut of prosperity, he understood, wasn't just a thing to be found. It was a feeling, a way of being, a way of living. It was the feeling of connection, of shared joy, of boundless kindness that grew when everyone was open and caring. A joyful realization, soft and warm as a ray of morning sunshine, bloomed in his heart. It felt like a deep, happy sigh, making his little chest puff out, not with pride, but with profound wonder. This was the greatest treasure of all. This feeling, this understanding, was far more satisfying than any pile of nuts, no matter how big or shiny. He no longer felt the old pangs of fear about not being the best nut finder. He didn't need to be. He could be something even better. A kindness sharer, a wonder listener, a joy spreader. He looked at the acorn shell, still gently protecting the sapling. It was a silent teacher, a humble guide. It had taught him that being open, even when it felt like being empty, was the way to truly receive. It was the way to connect. It was the way to find true success and happiness, not by taking, but by being ready to give, to listen, and to love. The forest, still glistening with raindrops, seemed to hum a soft, grateful tune around him. Squeaky knew, with a clear and happy heart, that his adventure was just beginning. He had so much more to learn, so much more to see, and so many more acts of kindness to share. Now that his eyes and his heart were truly open, he was no longer just chasing a dream. He was living a purpose, one tiny emerald-eyed squirrel, ready to embrace all the wonders the forest had to offer. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with soft streaks of orange and purple. The forest, though still damp from the storm, was beginning to hum again with its gentle evening songs. Squeaky felt lighter than ever before, his heart filled with the wisdom Professor Hoot had shared. He looked at the acorn shell, still nestled by the little Heartwood sapling, acting as its shield and comfort. He knew, deep down, that his journey with this vessel of whispers was far from over. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. The storm had truly passed, leaving behind a refreshed, vibrant world. Squeaky, waking up in his cozy hollow, felt a new kind of energy bubbling inside him. It wasn't the frantic energy of gathering nuts, but a joyful, bubbling feeling, like a tiny spring suddenly finding its way to the surface. He looked at his own bulging nut pouch, usually his pride and joy, and it seemed a little less important now. His gaze drifted to the now empty space where his acorn shell usually rested, having left it with the sapling for the night. A new idea, bright and sparkling like the morning dew, sprang into his mind. He scurried out, his paws quick and eager. He found Flick and Pip, already busy gathering the nuts that the storm had scattered. They looked tired and a little sad, their pouches much less full than before. Flick sighed as he picked up a lonely hazelnut. "This storm," he grumbled, "it made us lose so much." Pip nodded, his little whiskers drooping. "Yes," he squeaked, "all our hard work, just gone." Squeaky approached them, his big emerald eyes twinkling. "Friends," he squeaked, his voice full of a new, cheerful energy, "I have an idea. Let's go on a treasure hunt." Flick and Pip looked at him, puzzled. "A treasure hunt?" Flick asked, scratching his ear. "But we just lost all our treasures," Pip added, "and there aren't any more nuts to be found after this storm." Squeaky giggled, a bright, clear sound. "Not for those kinds of treasures," he explained, wiggling his nose with excitement. "This is a new kind of treasure hunt, an empty treasure hunt." Flick and Pip exchanged confused glances. "Empty?" They both squeaked at the same time. "This sounded very silly, yes," Squeaky said, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "Instead of finding the biggest nut to fill our pouches, we're going to search for things we can use our empty objects for, too. Help others or appreciate nature." He scampered over to a discarded bird's nest that had fallen during the storm, its soft, woven cup now empty. "Look," he chirped, picking it up gently. "This is empty, What good things could we do with an empty nest? He held it up, his eyes shining with possibility. Flick and Pip looked at each other, still unsure, but Squeaky's excitement was catching. Flick found a hollow reed, long and slender, like this. He asked, blowing through it, making a low, funny whistle. Pip picked up a half-eaten berry, its inside scooped out, leaving a tiny, empty cup. Or this, exactly, Squeaky cheered. Now, let's find things we can use them for. What can your hollow reed help with, Flick? And your berry cup, Pip, at first. It was a bit clumsy and silly. Flick tried to use his reed to scoop up a tiny puddle of water, but it just ran out the other end. He blew through it too hard, and it made a loud, honking sound that startled the sleepy caterpillar, making it wiggle away very fast. Flick burst into giggles, a deep, rumbling sound for a squirrel. Squeaky laughed, too, his tiny body shaking with Pip tried to use his berry cup to catch a falling leaf, but it fluttered past, landing gently on his nose, which made him sneeze. This made all three of them laugh even harder, their joyful sounds echoing through the quiet forest. They stumbled upon a group of baby beetles, scurrying nervously. Their home, a rotten log, had been broken apart by the storm, and they had no shelter. Squeaky remembered the sparkle sprite. "Look," he exclaimed, "an empty beetle shell." He found a larger beetle shell, long empty, and carefully turned it over, creating a tiny, safe dome for the baby beetles. They quickly scurried underneath, their tiny legs wiggling with relief. A little wave of warmth spread through Squeaky. Flick, inspired, looked at his hollow reed. He saw a tiny, thirsty ant struggling on a dry patch of earth. He remembered the ladybug story that Squeaky shared. Carefully, he dipped one end of his reed into a dewdrop caught on a leaf, and then aimed the other end towards the ant, letting a tiny drop of water trickle out. The ant drank, then waved its antennae in thanks. Flick's face lit up with a happy smile. "I helped," he chirped, feeling a new kind of happiness he hadn't known from just collecting nuts. Pip, with his berry cup, saw a tiny, broken feather, so delicate it could be carried away by the slightest breeze. He remembered the moon moths and the winds. Whispers, he carefully picked up the feather and placed it in his berry cup. As he walked, the wind gently swirled through the empty cup, making the feather dance and sway in a beautiful, silent ballet. It wasn't a nut, but it was beautiful, and it made his heart feel light. They spent the whole morning on their empty treasure hunt. They used an old, empty snail shell to leave a small offering of seeds for a hungry robin. They found a hollow twig that, when gently tapped, made a quiet, comforting rhythm for a group of baby crickets whose chirping had been scattered by the storm. They discovered that a broken piece of old, empty honeycomb, when held up to the light, cast beautiful, patterned shadows that made them all gasp in wonder. Their initial clumsiness turned into a playful, joyful exploration. They were laughing more than they had in a long time. There was no competition, no measuring of who had the biggest or the most. It was all about what good they could bring to the forest and how much beauty they could find in things that seemed empty. Squeaky felt a profound sense of joyful realization. The forest wasn't just a place to take from. It was a place to give to share with, to connect with, and by being open, by looking at empty spaces not as burdens but as possibilities, they were discovering a whole new kind of richness. This was the true treasure hunt, the one that filled their hearts, not their pouches. They were finding the great nut of prosperity, not as a single, physical nut, but as the boundless kindness and wonder that blossomed when they opened themselves to the needs of others and the silent magic of the world around them. And it was a treasure they could all share together. The forest air, still fresh and clean after the great shadow storm, now seemed to hum with a new kind of energy. It was a soft, joyful hum, like a million tiny wings fluttering in harmony. Squeaky, along with Flick and Pip, continued their empty treasure hunt, their laughter echoing sweetly through the trees. They weren't looking for nuts anymore, but for opportunities to share kindness and find wonder in the world around them. Each small act of giving, each unexpected discovery, filled their hearts with a special kind of warmth. News of Squeaky's helpfulness, like a gentle breeze, began to ripple through the forest. It started with the grateful chirps of the baby beetles in their new shell home, and the happy buzz of the aunt who had received water from Flick's reed. The mother sparrow, whose babies had been fed by the kind mouse, told her fellow birds. Word traveled from bird to squirrel, from squirrel to rabbit, from rabbit to badger, weaving its way through the dense green canopy and across the forest floor. Other animals, even the ones who used to be very busy and very competitive, started to notice they had always focused on gathering, on filling their own stores, just like Squeaky used to. But now they saw something different. They saw the quiet joy on Flick's face when the aunt drank from his reed. They saw the peaceful glow of the little Heartwood Sapling, still being shielded by Squeaky's acorn shell. They heard the laughter of Squeaky and his friends as they used seemingly useless things for unexpected good. A sleepy old bear, usually, only concerned with finding the sweetest berries for himself, spotted a family of tiny field mice struggling to move a heavy, fallen leaf that blocked their path. He remembered the ants working together. With a gentle grunt, he nudged the leaf with his enormous paw, clearing the way for them. The mice, wide-eyed with surprise and gratitude, scurried through, squeaking their thanks. The bear felt a rumbling, warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known from simply eating berries. Even Grumpy Badger, who usually spent his days grumbling about everything and everyone, heard the whispers. Grumpy Badger lived in a deep, dark hole, and he was very proud of how efficient his hole was at being, well, a hole. It was for hiding, for sleeping, and for being grumpy. He heard that Squeaky was finding good in empty things, in being open. Grumpy Badger scoffed. Rubbish. My hole is for me. But the idea, like a persistent little gnat, kept buzzing in his mind. He watched the sunlight filtering through the trees, making bright patterns on the forest floor. His hole was always so dark. He loved sunshine, but it never reached him. He grumbled, a curious glint in his usually squinty eyes. If emptiness can hold things, maybe my empty hole can hold sunshine. He lumbered out of his burrow, a funny sight, dragging a large, empty snail shell behind him. He then tried to position his empty hole so it could collect sunshine. He shuffled around, pushing at the earth around his burrow entrance, trying to tilt it just right. He tried scooping up handfuls of sunlight with the snail shell and dumping them into his hole, but of course, the sunshine just stayed outside. He grumbled louder, kicking a pebble. Squeaky, Flick, and Pip watched him from behind a bush, trying very hard not to giggle, their paws clamped over their mouths. Grumpy Badger was doing something so silly, so clumsy, but it was also an effort. He was trying to be open to something new, even if he didn't quite know how. They exchanged a look, and a wave of silent laughter rippled between them. Grumpy Badger, huffing and puffing, finally gave up on trying to fill his hole with sunshine. He slumped down, looking even grumpier. But then he noticed something. A tiny, shivering butterfly, its wings still damp from the storm, had fallen near his burrow entrance. It was trying to dry its wings, but the ground was cold and wet. Without thinking, Grumpy Badger, still huffing from his sunny efforts, instinctively pushed his empty snail shell closer to the butterfly, creating a small, dry, sheltered spot. The butterfly, grateful for the tiny warmth, slowly crawled inside. Grumpy Badger watched it, and a tiny, almost imperceptible smile, just a flicker, touched his gruff face. He didn't realize it, but he had just performed his own act of selfless kindness. Squeaky, Flick, and Pip saw it, and their hearts swelled with warmth. This was a moment of deep wonder. The forest felt a little lighter, a little more connected, all because Squeaky, a tiny squirrel with a big heart and an empty acorn shell, had learned the power of being open. Animals started leaving small, unexpected gifts for each other: a perfect feather for a bird's nest, a smooth, warm stone for a cold-blooded lizard, a handful of soft moss for a tired rabbit's burrow. They started noticing the silent struggles of their neighbors and instinctively offering what they had, even if it was just an empty space for comfort or a moment of shared quiet. The old competitive feelings didn't disappear entirely, but they softened. Instead of just trying to be the best individual, they started to feel like they were part of something bigger, a network of kindness and generosity. The forest hummed with a quiet, joyful energy, a feeling of shared prosperity that went far beyond any single nut or any single achievement. Squeaky watched all these changes, his emerald eyes shining with profound wonder. He saw the ripple of kindness spreading like soft waves across a calm pond. It had started with his own small acts, inspired by his seemingly empty shell, and now it was transforming the whole forest. He realized that true strength wasn't just in what you possessed, but in what you were willing to give and how much connection you allowed into your life. The forest wasn't just a place to live. It was a living, breathing community, made vibrant by the open hearts of its inhabitants. And in every gentle act, in every shared moment, Squeaky felt the true, boundless essence of the great nut of prosperity, growing stronger with every shared kindness. The days passed, gentle and bright, and the forest hummed with a newfound warmth. The ripples of kindness that Squeaky had started with his simple, open acorn shell had spread far and wide. The grumbling of Grumpy Badger had lessened, sometimes, replaced by a tiny, almost smile when he saw a small creature using the dry spot near his burrow. Flick and Pip and all the other squirrels still gathered nuts, but now they also looked for opportunities to share, to help, and to find quiet moments of wonder in their busy days. Squeaky often visited the little Heartwood Sapling. It was growing, stronger each day, its leaves unfurling to catch the sunlight, its tiny stem reaching proudly towards the sky. The acorn shell had remained faithfully by its base, a silent reminder of the storm it had helped weather, its smooth, empty curve, a constant symbol of protection and hope. Squeaky felt a quiet joy every time he saw it, knowing his little shell had helped something so precious flourish. One beautiful, clear night, the stars shone like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. The moon, full and round, cast a soft, silvery glow over the sleeping forest. Squeaky, after a day filled with new discoveries and shared kindnesses, finally snuggled into his cozy bed in his hollow. The air was cool and peaceful, carrying the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers. Before settling down for the night, Squeaky had made a special journey. He had visited the Heartwood Sapling one last time, The sapling was now standing strong. On its own, its roots firmly planted, its new leaves sparkling in the moonlight. Squeaky gently, carefully, lifted the acorn shell from where it had rested, like a faithful guardian by the sapling's base. The sapling, though silent, seemed to send a wave of gentle gratitude, a soft whisper of thanks, as Squeaky retrieved his cherished companion. It had served its purpose beautifully, and now it was time for it to return to Squeaky's side. He held it gently in his paws, feeling its smooth, cool surface. It had become his most cherished possession, not for what it contained, but for what it represented. He no longer felt silly or foolish carrying it. The memories of its journey were etched into its very being, and into Squeaky's heart. He remembered the first day, how heavy and useless it had seemed when it was just empty, how he had tried to put a pebble in it, then a leaf, and they had just rolled out. He chuckled softly at the memory, a tiny, fond laugh. How silly he had been now. When he held it, he felt a deep, quiet sense of peace. It was a peace that settled over him like a warm blanket, chasing away any lingering worries or fears. He brought the hollow opening of the shell to his ear, just as he had done that magical day when the moon moths danced. And there it was, the soft, melodic whispers of the wind, flowing through the empty space, singing a lullaby just for him. Hum, she, whoosh. It was the sound of the forest breathing, of the leaves sighing, of the gentle currents of air moving between the branches. He listened intently, and it felt as if the forest itself was speaking to him, sharing its most ancient secrets. He heard the gentle hum of the forest, a subtle symphony of sleepy crickets, distant owls hooting soft goodnights, and the almost inaudible rustle of tiny creatures moving through the undergrowth. It was the sound of life, vibrant and interconnected, even in its quietest moments. He felt utterly connected to it all, a small yet important part of this vast, wonderful world. He thought of Professor Hoot's words again, his wise old voice, echoing softly in his mind. True success isn't about how much you grab, but how much good you can share and how much kindness you can let in. Squeaky now understood these words with his whole heart. He understood that true success isn't just about what you have. It wasn't about the biggest nut, or the fullest pouch, or the grandest hollow. Those things could be lost in a storm, scattered by the wind, just like Flick and Pip's nuts had been. Possessions could bring a fleeting happiness, but they couldn't bring this deep, abiding peace. Instead, true success was about what you were open to. It was about being open to the needs of others, like the thirsty ladybug and the lost sparkle sprite, allowing kindness to flow from you. It was about being open to the unseen wonders of nature, like the wind's whispers and the moon moths' dance, allowing magic to flow into you. It was about being open to helping, to protecting, to sharing, to connecting with the world and all its creatures. The shell, because it was empty, had been ready to receive water, ready to receive whispers, ready to receive a tiny sparkle sprite, ready to protect a sapling. Its emptiness was its greatest strength, its openness its greatest treasure. Squeaky realized his own heart too had been made more open by this journey. He had stopped focusing only on himself and his own desires, and in doing so, he had found something far more fulfilling. A deep, quiet peace settled over him. He felt it in his paws, in his twitching nose, in the soft beat of his little heart. He was content, he was happy, he felt loved, and he felt like he had so much love to give back to the forest. He closed his sparkling eyes, holding the shell. Close. listening to the gentle hum of the world. He knew that the quest for the great nut of prosperity wasn't about finding a single, magical nut that would solve everything. It was about discovering the true, boundless prosperity that lay within kindness, connection, and an open heart. It was a treasure that grew bigger the more you shared it, a light that shone brighter the more you let it in. And Squeaky, the little squirrel with the big, open heart and the empty acorn shell, was now truly rich in the ways that mattered most. He drifted off to sleep, a soft, happy smile on his face, dreaming of a forest always filled with kindness, wonder, and the gentle hum of connection. The soft, silvery light of dawn stretched across the forest, painting the leaves with a gentle, waking glow. Birds began their cheerful morning songs, and the air hummed with the quiet stirrings of a new day. Squeaky, waking in his cozy hollow, felt a lightness in his heart, a deep contentment that shone in his big, sparkling emerald eyes. He reached for his beloved acorn shell, now resting beside his bed, polished smooth from all his adventures. It was no longer just a shell. It was a symbol, a silent reminder of all the wonderful lessons he had learned. Squeaky, now wiser and even more sparkling-eyed, still found nuts. His tiny paws still knew how to scamper up trees and dig for buried treasures. Old habits are like comfortable burrows, familiar and safe. But his days were different now. The frantic rush was gone. He didn't just gather for himself anymore. He gathered with a new kind of awareness, a new kind of joy. He would spot a perfect plump acorn, and instead of immediately tucking it into his own pouch, he would pause. He might see a smaller, slower squirrel nearby, struggling to reach a branch. With a soft chatter, Squeaky would nudge the acorn towards them, or perhaps even carry it over and drop it gently at their paws. He saw the flicker of surprise, then the warm glow of gratitude in their eyes. This simple act of sharing, of giving a little piece of his bounty, filled him with a happiness that a whole mountain of nuts could never provide. He understood now, deep in his little squirrel heart, that sharing made the nuts themselves taste sweeter somehow. He also spent his days helping others. If he saw a beetle overturned on its back, he wouldn't just scurry past. He'd gently nudge it with his nose until it was right side up again, sending it on its way. If a baby bird fell from its nest, too small to fly, Squeaky would patiently stand guard nearby, chattering softly to comfort it until its parents returned. He helped clear tangled twigs from busy paths so smaller creatures wouldn't trip. He found sunny, dry spots for tired, damp butterflies to rest their wings after a night's dew. Each small act, each moment of help, brought a quiet hum of satisfaction to his spirit, and he spent more time just listening to the forest. He would find a quiet, sun-dappled spot, perhaps near the now thriving Heartwood Sapling, which stood taller and stronger each day, a testament to care and openness. He would sit very still, holding his acorn shell to his ear, letting the wind sing its gentle whispers. He heard the rustle of leaves telling stories of ancient times, the soft trickle of hidden streams, the distant calls of creatures talking to each other. He didn't just hear sounds. He heard the forest's heartbeat, its quiet wisdom, its deep, abiding peace. This listening filled him with wonder, a boundless, quiet awe for the magical world around him. Squeaky's new dream wasn't about the biggest pile of nuts anymore. That old dream, once so grand and important, now felt small and a little dusty, like a forgotten pebble. His new dream was so much bigger, so much brighter. His new dream was about helping the forest flourish through kindness and openness. He knew with a clear and unwavering certainty that true magic lies in an open heart. It wasn't hidden in a mythical nut or in a secret, powerful spell. It was right there, inside every creature, waiting to be discovered when they chose to be kind, when they chose to share, when they chose to be open to the world and its needs. Squeaky continued his days, a little beacon of this new understanding. He still chased butterflies, but now he admired their delicate wings and soft flight, not just their speed. He still giggled at Flick and Pip's silly antics, but now his laughter was even warmer, knowing they were all part of the same joyful, connected world. He still looked for nuts, but his greatest treasure was no longer found underground. It was found in the smiles he inspired, the comfort he offered, and the quiet harmony he helped to create. The forest itself seemed to change around him. The air felt lighter, the colors brighter. The shy creatures became a little less shy, the grumpy ones a little less grumpy. It was as if Squeaky's open heart and the lessons he shared had become a warm current flowing through the very roots of the forest, nourishing everything it touched. He had found his true purpose, not by seeking, but by being. And that, he knew, was the greatest treasure of all. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Squeaky was returning to his hollow. He carried his acorn shell, the gentle whispers of the wind now a familiar lullaby in his ear. As he approached the entrance to his cozy home, he saw a soft, golden light pulsing from inside. It wasn't a firefly. This light was different, warmer, and it shimmered with an ancient, powerful glow. With his heart thumping a happy rhythm against his ribs, Squeaky cautiously peered into his hollow. There, nestled amongst his carefully collected nuts, lay something he had never seen before. It was an acorn, but unlike any other. It was larger than any nut he had ever found, its shell a rich, luminous gold, and it pulsed with the same soft, magical light he had seen from outside. Etched into its surface were tiny, swirling patterns that seemed to dance and shift with the light. This was it. This was the great nut of prosperity. Squeaky's eyes, wide with wonder, filled with tears of pure joy. He hadn't been searching for it for days, hadn't even thought of it in his new dream. Yet, here it was. It hadn't been found by frantic digging or by being the best at gathering. It had appeared because he had learned to be open, to share, to care. As he looked at the glowing nut, a soft, warm voice, familiar yet deeper than Professor Hoot's, seemed to fill his mind, gentle as a summer breeze. It was the voice of the forest itself. "Squeaky, little one," the voice whispered. "The great nut of prosperity is not a prize to be earned, but a gift to be received. It blossoms not where greed grows, but where kindness flourishes. Its magic is unlocked not by taking, but by the open heart that learns to give." Squeaky carefully nudged the golden nut with his nose. It felt warm and alive. He didn't feel the need to hoard it or to keep its magic to himself. He knew with absolute certainty that its true power lay in being shared. Its purpose wasn't to make him rich, but to empower him to enrich the entire forest. He gently picked up his empty acorn shell and placed it beside the glowing, great nut of prosperity. The light from the magical nut shimmered, reflecting beautifully in the smooth, empty curve of his shell. He realized they belonged together. The great nut represented the boundless potential of the forest and his empty shell, the boundless potential of an open heart. From that day forward, Squeaky remained the kindest, most giving squirrel in the forest. The great nut of prosperity became a symbol, radiating its gentle, golden light from his hollow, reminding everyone that true abundance lay in connection and compassion. He still found nuts, he still helped others, and he still listened to the whispers of the wind through his empty shell. But now, he carried with him the ultimate proof of his journey, the magical nut that had appeared, not through his search, but through his transformation. And the forest, filled with his joy and the ripple of shared kindness, truly prospered, glowing with a magic that had always been there, waiting for an open heart to discover it. And now, the story settles into quiet. Not an ending, just a resting place. Squeaky's journey, with his little acorn shell and his sparkling emerald eyes, was never about being the fastest or having the biggest pile of nuts. It was about something deeper, something quieter, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be real, the kind that lives inside each of us in the still moments. In the uncertain ones, we often think strength means being tough or never bending or always knowing the way. We believe that to achieve success in our studies, at work, or even when starting a new adventure like entrepreneurship, we must always be full, always busy, always grabbing. We are eager to be the best, to gather all the knowledge, to fill our plans with every detail, but sometimes we find ourselves running around without true success, feeling lost or empty even amidst all our efforts. But sometimes real strength is allowing yourself to feel, to soften, to trust, to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear, just like Squeaky did when he was lost in the Mossy Maze, or when the shadow storm raged around him. This story can help us gain success in our daily lives by reminding us that sometimes we have to empty our hearts, just like Squeaky's acorn shell was empty. We need to let go of old ideas, old ways of thinking that might be holding us back, so we can find and receive new knowledge and wisdom. An open heart, like an open shell, can welcome so much more than one that is always trying to be full of only what it already knows. And sometimes we have to listen to our environments and our hearts, to be brave enough to venture into new paths, even when they seem strange or uncertain. Squeaky listened to the whispers of the wind. He heard the silent cries for help from the ladybug, the sparkle sprite, and the sapling. He didn't just rush past, he opened himself to their needs. When we open our hearts and truly listen, not just to words, but to the feelings around us, we discover opportunities to share kindness and to connect in ways we never imagined. This connection, this shared goodness, is the real treasure, the true prosperity that helps us and our world flourish. If this story brought you a sense of peace or reminded you of something quiet and true, we invite you to gently like the video, share it with someone who may need a moment to breathe, and subscribe if you'd like to return to this quiet space again. Every kind word, every share, helps us grow this small corner of stillness in a busy world. Thank you for your presence, for listening deeply, for taking this walk with us. And as you step back into your world, may you carry with you the reminder that true success isn't always about what you gather, but what you share. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply continues, softly, steadily, with an open heart. Take good care and keep going. You can do it.